Oh my God. Happy Friday! It is FU Friday. Welcome to another episode of Go FUD Yourself. Fridays are where we say FU to our favorite people of the week. JD Gagnon here. Kiara, how you doing?
Hello, I am so great. We have some cool news today.
Perfect. What are we talking about?
Okay, the overarching thing that's going on here is that the world is trying to regulate. And now the World Economic Forum has actually asked people to get together and regulate. Hilarious. So this is kind of like all encompassing of that, but we're going to talk about Indonesia and how they are or aren't regulating, how that's kind of going. Same with Norway, and we'll get into France and then South Africa. So it's a big crypto arms race regulation day, which you know is my fave.
Is your fave. All right. If you're ready, let's do it. Oh, wait. Before we do it. Shout out to CoinDesk. Love the merch. It's one of my favorites. I like the little yellow fishy guys all over, or whatever the hell they are. You know that game back in the day where they had those little fish that would like do this thing, and then you'd have like your little string fishing rod?
Oh yeah.
That's kind of what these guys look like to me. You know? Okay.
I take that.
Anyways, I'm a big fan of the CoinDesk shirt. Also a big fan of CoinDesk in general. We use a lot of their releases and reports as firepower for Go FUD Yourself. So anyways, appreciate CoinDesk as always. All right, let's go. All right, welcome back. We are on Tweeter Spaces again. It's episode, 72 today? 72 episodes. Kind of cool, to be honest. You know, pretty big fan of the progress so far. We're getting increasing amounts of views. A lot more people are giving feedback and into the pod. So I don't see any reason to slow down for the foreseeable future. Everybody keeps telling us we should do like seasons and take a break for a week and all this other shit. And I think, you know what? I'm just like weird about being incredibly persistent, I think. And I
keep saying that it's still season 1. I figured that at like 120 episodes or something, we could take a day off, but also why? It's not like the news stops.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, once you build some momentum, like why would you take a week off? And the reason I say this is because for some reason, like I'm a big consumer of podcasts personally. And for some reason, when my favorite podcasts take a holiday, I'm like super annoyed.
Are you?
Yes. Like it drives me crazy. And it's ridiculous because everybody obviously needs time off. Everybody needs a vacazione. But I feel like
not you.
I feel like it's kind of like the Tucker Carlson show on Fox News. If Tucker's out of town, they still do Tucker Carlson just to someone else. And because you want to always have a product available for your viewers. So anyways, Maybe we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll get some stand-ins. Maybe like you'll have a guest for a week and I'll have a guest for a week and we get some time off or something. But anyways, all right. So we got a bunch of shit to cover today. I'm really good at rambling. So what do you want to start with?
We're starting. Okay. You went to Bitcoin Miami, right?
Well, define went to.
I know. I love asking you this.
Was I in Miami during Bitcoin Miami?
Did you meet Barat from Indonesia? Apparently he was like shaking babies, kissing hands. So essentially,
Barat, baby shaking. So
Barat is one of the heads of finance for the Indonesian government, and he actually came to Bitcoin Miami 2023, which is pretty cool. Yeah. And he was touting that Indonesia is ready to embrace Bitcoin. And the concept here wasn't just we're ready to use Bitcoin, because there is actually already a load of transactions in Indonesia. I looked at some facts and stats last night. The majority, I believe it was 41% of adults actively use cryptocurrency in their day-to-day life in Indonesia.
Yeah.
That's wild. So they didn't.
A lot of reasons for that, actually. Like the play to earn gaming, exploded in Southeast Asia. So anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just thought that was really interesting, honestly, because 41% is a huge number of adults. And I don't think that we see that sort of uptake in any other country so far.
Yeah, I think it's important to note Indonesia is not tiny either. Like there's a
Right.
good amount of people that live in Indonesia, and so you know, it's definitely interesting. It's not an economic powerhouse. It's not one of the ones that we would look at and be like, whoa, 41% of this country is using crypto. That's a massive signal. But I mean, again, they have had no shortage of controversy over the last few decades in Indonesia with governments and corruption and economic woes and a bunch of other things. So this does make logical sense. It is a way for people to take back a little bit of control until CBDC.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we're going to get there. But the other thing that was really cool is he wants to talk about Bitcoin mining. So they're saying that Indonesia is set up for huge amounts of natural resources, like their 800 rivers, and they have a lot of geothermal energy. I did not know they were into geothermal energy. And the idea here is that they can Bitcoin mine like efficiently, effectively, and in a green way, which again is not something I thought Indonesia was going to come out with when I first opened these articles.
Yeah, I think, you know, the biggest question for Bitcoin miners, well, there's many of them, but one of the biggest ones is the government going to be friendly? And this obviously, Barat is a government official, so you know, if he's around trying to attract people to mine Bitcoin, of course he was focused on BTC at BTC Miami.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they're probably pro many other cryptocurrencies and you know, really working towards regulation. The challenge with the green energy thing, especially in these emerging markets, is inconsistency in energy supply and potentially drastically whipsawing energy prices. Like green energy is green, but it's still not free. And depending on the supply chain and who manages all of that, that can be a question. So I think, you know, if they make meaningful efforts to try to ensure continuity of service and to put some sort of parameters or boundaries around cost, then for a certain amount of time, I think they're going to be able to attract a lot of miners. I mean, there was a massive amount of miners that all got booted out of China a while ago. Many of them relocated to America, many to Canada, because Canada had comparatively cheap energy for a while. That has all since ended. Canada's energy has gone up like insane, just like everybody else. America is constantly threatening to put a 30% additional tax on top of the cost of energy, which would render Bitcoin mining a net loss. So, I mean, we got to look for other jurisdictions that we don't think the government one day is going to do a complete 180. And so, I mean, we're seeing meaningful government officials traveling outside of Indonesia to try to, you know, muster up interest in this. So I think it's net really good. So we're not saying FU to Indonesia. Your StreamYard's muted. Your StreamYard's muted.
Oh, thank you. The thing that we will say FU to isn't Indonesia itself, but maybe some of the regulatory oversight in Indonesia, because you're talking about how lovely and open it is, and maybe that's not quite the case. I do have to say that I Google translated that article about Barat. So I didn't find...
I'm not saying how lovely and open it is. I'm saying how lovely and open it has to be to attract people. Go ahead.
I didn't find American news about Barat, which is kind of disappointing because it's a cool story to look at all of the different world leaders that are coming to something like Bitcoin Miami, right? So I was a little bit disappointed to not find that, but I did find it in Indonesian news. And so if we have misreported something, it's because I've Google translated it. So please feel free to message me and be like, no, that's not what we think, or that's not what the sentiment is, or you wildly mistranslated geothermal, could be the case, but I did my best here. So, but part of why this is coming up now is that last year in 2022, we were told that at the latest in June 2023, there would be a government-run crypto exchange in and for Indonesia. And so it had already been pushed out 6 months. So 6 months ago, it was supposed to launch, and there was a big news article about how it hadn't launched, and there were all these technical difficulties, and there's a lot of mistrust and that kind of thing. So it was being pushed out 6 months. I couldn't find anything about it launching or not launching. And so my FU here is kind of like the ghosting of the Indonesian regulatory space. Like, how dare they not serve their citizens in this way? Right? They've promised it, and there's just nothing.
How dare they? How dare you? What's that girl's name? Greta? You sound like Greta. How dare you? Anyways.
Good. I'll advocate for the Indonesians.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I think, again, Indonesia is not known for regulatory consistency, generally speaking. They're not known for consistency in government in general. And so, I mean, this isn't super surprising. I think, oddly, I'm somewhat patient with Indonesia here, because I mean, even the US, with probably more individuals and firepower than any other country on earth, still can't figure out how to regulate it. So, I mean,
Sure.
Part of that is political, I think, and part of that is just systemic.
Some of this too, though, it has to do with, like you said, a lot of Indonesians might be doing play to earn or something to that end. So they have a lot of crypto in their day-to-day life, right?
Yeah.
And they saw over the last year, I have some facts here that I'll have to find, but they saw over the last year that there was a massive decline in people actually using crypto in their day-to-day life, kind of in the wake of this regulatory environment. So people aren't sure if they continue to use crypto before it's regulated, if they're going to face backlash. So people have really pulled off of actually transacting with it, and they're using it more like an investment right now. And with that in mind, they've actually changed which government body is regulating crypto in Indonesia. So it was originally more of a monetary body, and now it's more of an investment body. Kind of an interesting shift, something that we're also seeing. It's kind of like the CFTC to the SEC in America. So something that we are seeing elsewhere. But I think that this is really limiting people because they don't know what's coming next. And so we often talk about regulation and how it impacts businesses, right? How someone's not going to be able to operate there, and that will have a trickle down kind of effect to the retail users. But in this case, it's actually just directly impacting the retail users.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, it probably impacts businesses that otherwise would have started in Indonesia and maybe aren't. Similar to, I think the ultimate FU here is just, you know, the complacency or general lack of urgency globally to figure this out, because that's always the case, right? Like this, people, as soon as you have uncertainty with respect to regulation, everybody is only left to make assumptions, and you know, the assumptions are rampant, and no one knows what's actually true. And it's very difficult to start a business, maintain a business, participate in a market where all of your risk exposure is based on assumptions you've made. It makes it incredibly difficult. That's been my biggest argument. We're not going to love regulation, but let's pitter patter. Let's get at her. Like, I mean, let's get it done so that we can all just move forward. And we don't have this looming cloud of fear and uncertainty, which I think is, you know, so FU, regulators not getting their shit together fast enough.
Regulators. I do want to say before we move on that we don't really talk about crypto as it might have some sort of like GDP impact. But as we get closer to regulation, as we get closer to CBDCs, I'm interested to see how that will be accounted for or not accounted for. And one of the facts and figures that I was able to find is that in Indonesia, the value of crypto transactions over the last year has fallen from 859.4 trillion rupiahs, which is about 55 million USD, to 296 trillion rupiahs. So that is a huge fall. And is that attributed exclusively to us waiting for regulation, or does this have more to do with the bear market, or how many different factors are coming in play here? But as you said, that's obviously going to impact businesses opening there, but also probably businesses that are actively working there right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few reasons for that. I think the entire market, like if you were to have the same amount of profit that profit is denominated in same raw amount. So an example, if your profit is 1 Bitcoin, if that Bitcoin was worth 60,000 before, you might still make 1 Bitcoin profit today, but it's, I don't know the exact Bitcoin price, somewhere. I don't want to misquote it. Give me a second.
If only you had some sort of extension.
If only I had everything open all the time. 26,800 at the moment. Realm Terminal, it's a place to figure that out. But anyways, quick shameless plug. But yeah, I mean, 27,000, your same profit is 50% down from the year previous. And that's in Bitcoin and ETH. Those are like the only two that didn't take a complete dump over the last year, in particular in 22. So, I mean, even when you look at TVLs in the space and stuff, all things remaining equal, there might actually be the same amount of raw tokens there. It's just their USD equivalent value has gone down by 80, 85, 90, 95% in many cases. So it's not that necessarily that less people are participating. It's just that the extent to which they profit is slightly diminished at current prices. So maybe just a little context. But yeah, that GDP, like in America, they figure that they're missing billions a year in untaxed gains on crypto, even with incredibly ramped up IRS enforcement. So I guess we'll see. We shall see.
So that was Indonesia. Now we're going to just travel across the world to Norway. Norway's central bank is telling the Norway government that MiCA is not enough and they need to do something themselves.
Yep.
There's not more news than that. They're just proposing the recommendation of a national strategy, which is a very bureaucratic way to say, get your shit together.
Yeah. So I have some thoughts on this, as you can imagine.
All right. Oh, I'm shocked.
Yeah, who knew? So we're generally going to need for crypto and blockchain, like this is the very limiting belief that I think a lot of these jurisdictions have, is that you don't launch a protocol in one country at a time. I mean, you can, but that's not how network effects have been so amazing in blockchain so far, is because you launch a protocol and it's, in theory, globally accessible immediately. That is different. I think I talked about this once before on the show. That is different than a brick and mortar bank, as an example, or an investment platform, or a company that goes public. Like when they go public, they only have to learn about that jurisdiction at that particular time and abide by those rules. And if other jurisdictions want to participate, then they can. It's different with a protocol because they're de facto global unless you do otherwise. And I think this is incredibly short-sighted, because what this means, and this we're already seeing this with the US and Canada right now. They've said everything. Well, Canada has said everything's a security. The US has implied everything's probably a security. And for that reason, major platforms are just saying, all right, we're out. Everybody has to avoid US and Canadian persons, period. End of story. Now, that will change if we have some hegemony globally on regulation. If there's some consistency where it's like, okay, here's the base model. Everybody's pretty much the same.
Okay. We're going to talk about that at the very end.
No, but I want to talk about Norway. I mean, Norway doesn't have enough influence, honestly. Like,
right.
All that happens if they come out with regulations in addition to MiCA, I say, is it worth it? I can just geo-block and KYC block Norway. So my point here is not that it's a bad thing that they're thinking about this, but I think it's very short-sighted if you go too far.
And we're talking about major players, which is fascinating because, as we've seen, like Binance has pulled out of Canada. Who's going to pull out of Norway, right?
Yeah.
They're worried about the opposite thing happening in South Africa right now. So essentially, South Africa has said that you need a particular type of license. You have to register if you're going to be a DEX or a SEX or anything like that. They do give you 6 months from June 1st. So this is more reasonable than Canada's 30 days registration. Remember that? So I think this is a pretty reasonable period. And then if you don't register, you can get fined. And they're more worried about small companies not successfully doing this. Just like we saw in Canada, many small companies actually merged. Remember that big Try merger?
Yeah.
Because they couldn't fulfill all of the needs that were set out by the retail license. And people are worried the same thing's going to happen in South Africa, which, kills innovation. And since South Africa isn't exactly a world leader in crypto anyways, people wonder why they are looking to limit already.
I mean, they do have a surprisingly large amount of participation given the size of their economy. This one is like, I think this is unavoidable, to be honest. Like when we start implementing regulation, the barriers to entry are going to go up. That's whether it's intended or unintended. That is the only inevitable consequence. Well, one of the inevitable consequences of regulation is that the path to innovation becomes a little bit more windy and a little bit more uphill. And that's both from an understanding and sophistication perspective, but also cost. Compliance overhead in some jurisdictions is not simple. In Canada in particular, or the US, your reporting requirements are pretty steep, and there's a lot of back and forth consistently with regulators, and there's a lot of information and data you have to share, and you have to make sure it's accurate, obviously. So it's not a simple lift. It's not the same as launching a protocol with a couple of co-founders and raising $1 million and letting it buck for a year. I mean, you're not going to be raising less than probably 10 million to start a regulated entity in North America. I would expect that it's no different in South Africa. So I don't think you can completely avoid squishing some small players. And small is actually,
it's relative.
Well, it is, but it's potentially larger than one would think, right? Like even if you raised 5 to 10 million, even if you have a pretty decent trajectory already, I mean, the costs of operating, you have to have certain people with certain licenses. Those people understand their value, and they're definitely not cheap. I mean, you're adding a few million a year for sure in overhead just to be compliant. So if you're trying to raise for a 2.5, 3 year runway, I mean, again, we're 10, 15 million now, if you want the costs of startup plus just the cost of the first few years to get to scale. That's a big risk and a big investment for venture partners too. So yeah, it's definitely going to cause some pain and it's definitely going to cause some friction. But I think, I mean, I like that they're paying attention to this, that some people are saying, hey, like, let's make sure we don't squish too many small people if we can avoid it.
There's another implication here that was not discussed in the news, but BRICS includes South Africa. Yeah. And so we're actually seeing all of those countries now do something quite different in terms of crypto. And it could be that they're all testing grounds and then they'll come together and make a decision about what sort of digital currency they will use. Right? So in China, where they're practicing, they're trialing the CBDC in a whole city. Remember us talking about that? And it was quite an internal city. It's not like a big tourism city. And so they're enforcing CBDC usage in a retail perspective and seeing how people are going to do that. Russia is working actually with France to do cross-border payments with their CBDC. And so that is more of the institutional level. India is just a free-for-all. They said, we are not regulating crypto. Figure out what you're doing yourself. And now, of course, South Africa is doing the opposite and taking a bit of a heavy hand with regulation. I actually don't know offhand what Brazil does with crypto. Do you?
They've been pretty flip-floppy for a minute because they've also... Go ahead.
Well, we've just seen in the last few months, we've seen announcements from everyone but Brazil, I think, like within BRICS.
Yeah, so Brazil significantly changed their crypto regulations about a year ago, a little bit before the elections there. And then they had elections. So now there's, a new government, a new sheriff in town, so to speak. And I think they're trying to figure it out.
That's right. That was a really controversial election. But it's just interesting to think about how they're all kind of taking these different steps. They're going to have different information, but they are also all talking about BRICS is all talking about having a centralized digital currency. So I'm curious to see what they learn from all of these different elements. Going back to Europe, we have France. French lawmakers have unanimously agreed that you cannot be a crypto influencer in France. You will be fined. It's pretty serious. No crypto promotions by social media influencers. The reason that this is fascinating is, one, it's the first time that I've heard anything like this. And two, France just the other day was trying to position themselves as the blockchain center of Europe. Remember that? They wanted to be the hub. And so it's fascinating to me that they're interested in being the hub, but maybe only in this controlled way. Or we're interested in being the hub, but only in tech and not in marketing. Or I don't know. I'm not sure what the position could possibly be that we're going to ban influencers from doing this while also trying to be a tech hub.
I think generally speaking, influencer marketing is quite regulated in the investment space from a traditional perspective. So anytime that you're representing a brand or you're pitching a product, it's taken as if it's financial advice unless you acknowledge that you've been paid for it, and that's pretty public. Now, as a brand, I don't want influencers to say I was paid to talk about this, because the only benefit to their users is if their users think and if they actually care about the platform, right? So paid influencer marketing to me has always been a bit of a weird one. This is a little interesting. I think it's an area that a lot of, especially younger and more vulnerable, not uneducated, but inexperienced people can be heavily influenced by influencers. And that,
as per their role, yes.
And that's a real risk, right? Like we saw that with Kardashian and Jake and Logan Paul, and we've seen it with Kevin O'Leary and Tom Brady and Giselle and all these other people that have, somewhat shamelessly plugged some of these platforms. And I mean, you have a significant responsibility if you're an influential person and, are representing a brand. So anyways, I don't hate that
Actually, I do appreciate from that perspective. I appreciate that France is putting in a regulation so influencers know where they stand instead of taking the American approach of enforcing without a regulation. Because how many did we count? It was like 12 influencers are under investigation just from last year.
Yeah, ones that we know about.
Yeah, ones that we know of.
Who knows how many there are that?
No, I looked on the actual SEC site to find all the active. Yeah, and it was fewer than 20, but more than I had expected.
Well, look at you being a keen bean.
Always
a keen bean. Yeah, again, I would like to see, instead of just outright saying no to stuff, I would like to see maybe boundaries or goalposts around something so that there still is a path for people to do this, but it's just in a controlled and respected and reputable way. But anyways, our friends at the World Economic Forum.
I've been hustling you along this whole show because you keep wanting to talk about this, but it's a good summary of all the things that we've already talked about.
Well, the caveat here, though, is that I think the World Economic Forum is just a giant global manipulation scheme. So I immediately discount anything the World Economic Forum says because it's driven by business and they have very self-serving intentions. So
is your tin hat shaped like a boat today or like a bird today?
No, it's always shaped like a witch hat. Like it's really big and pointy. Maybe not like a big brim, but like.
No, like a cone head hat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like an antenna, right? I don't want to just have my own conspiracy theories. I would like to pick up other ones that are floating around out there. Joking aside, though, I actually agree here. Like, I really do think that there needs to be some version of global cooperation. I mean, there's not perfect global cooperation with respect to traditional finance and banks and a lot of other things. But I think there needs to be somewhat of, like, there's tax treaties everywhere. Every government has a different tax regime, but there's many, many, many treaties amongst countries to say, hey, we will accept your tax policies and not double tax people, in other ways. And so this maybe a path here is, okay, we acknowledge that our rules are a little bit different than your rules, but if a platform was approved in your jurisdiction, then we're willing maybe to accept that as acceptable in ours. I don't know what the answer is, honestly, but I just don't see a world where we can encourage the innovation that we've been seeing, while at the same time having an absolute minefield of very opaque quasi-regulations globally. It's trying to navigate it is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And I mean, there's some countries have a lot more teeth than others in terms of global enforcement. Mm-hmm. If you're a smaller Eastern European country, good luck extraditing people from America or anywhere else that are improperly operating in your country. And it's actually can be quite difficult if people are using IFPS and decentralization. They actually can't shut it down. Mm-hmm. In many ways. So I think it's, to people that are paying attention and understand the technology and its impacts, I think we have no choice but to find a way to try. In the end, in a decade from now, we'll probably end up with some relatively consistent global structure for how this works. But until then, it's just going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Fun or FUD?
Fun.
We have an awesome listener, Jafar, has joined us. And I've asked Jafar via Twitter if he has anyone to say FU to before we go today. Just so you know.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jafar.
Well, let me know if he said he or she says anything. He, she, they.
I don't know.
What's politically correct now? I don't even fucking know.
I think we just say they, just like we would in another language, because it's ambiguous until we know. But I thought Jafar was a man's name. But also, look at me being presumptive.
Yeah, assumptions just make an ass out of you. Not me, just you.
Just me. So the one thing that the World Economic Forum has done is they've written a white paper and they're talking about what they want from regulation, blah, blah, blah. So they say that Switzerland and Japan are the best examples of regulation right now. Do you know what Switzerland or Japan are doing?
Well, we've talked about both of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, Switzerland has always been somewhat open to a lot more financial privacy and a lot more attractive tax situations, and they are, generally speaking, fairly light on regulation in Switzerland. It's just it's a bit of a tax haven, always has been for my entire life that I've been paying attention to finance. I don't know exactly when that became a thing. So they do have rules. They've actually had some regulation and guidance in Switzerland for quite some time. There's quite a few platforms that we're friends with that actually are incorporated there and operate out of Switzerland. They don't have a massive population base. A lot of the financial resources there are actually from other countries, because for the longest time they wouldn't report your holdings in Switzerland. That has since somewhat changed. But anyways, I think Switzerland does have, fairly welcoming regulations. I'm not sure that it's enough that it really leans into consumer protection, which I think is what global regulators are going to be going for. It's a lot more attractive to us because the rules are a lot less and a lot a lot easier to comply with. I'm just not sure if it goes far enough. And Japan, on the other hand, is again trying to figure out how to regulate this. And I believe, if I remember correctly from a few days ago, they're, instead of saying it's a security or a commodity, they're approaching it as its own asset class. That's right. At least for the time being. So, I mean, we have a huge debate here in the United States whether it's a security or not. In Canada, it is a security. All crypto is a security. I think any jurisdiction that goes completely against that is just going to be, then there's going to be a difference. That's all. And so as long as the restrictions are less, so as long as whatever you're doing, if it's a registered security in America, is enough to appease these other jurisdictions, then I'm totally supportive of Switzerland and Japan's approach. But if not, if it's not enough, if they don't consider that acceptable, then again, these smaller countries, Japan, Switzerland, Norway, whatever else we were talking about, Indonesia, they're not tiny countries, but they're smaller countries. People will just avoid them. That's like, if they come out with too aggressive of regulation relative to what the rest of the developed world has, people are going to ignore it. The only group that probably gets away with that is maybe the US, because they're going to make whatever rules they want. And there's enough people in the US that there will be companies that will service it. It just won't be like we see now. The innovation in America will be, again, restricted likely to a select few that probably have already existed in traditional finance or have had a fairly seasoned experience in entrepreneurship, which is probably good in some ways from a consumer protection perspective. You don't want people that have never done this before running multiple $100 million platforms. Having said that, I mean, we've all got to that point having not done it before. So, I mean, are we all ill-equipped for this? I doubt it. But I would suspect there's a lot of groups that probably aren't equipped for that. And so, yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But again, FU to everybody dragging their feet. That's my big FU for today, is let's figure this shit out so we can stop talking about it. I'd love
to wrap, the World Economic Forum wants everyone to cooperate and get along in this one instance, even though we can't anywhere else. And a great example of people not cooperating and getting along is things like Indonesia is ready to have massive adoption of Bitcoin mining from a green perspective, which means that they would actually be taking business away from others, free market. I'm open for that, but we are still in a very competitive landscape. Indonesia also has not released their national exchange. So kind of FU to those regulators. Norway is their own bank has told them that they need to start regulating because MiCA is not good enough. So the one example we have of people actually getting along and agreeing on something being MiCA, and it's not good enough for Norway. And then likewise, France, who wants to be a tech hub and has been really forward thinking about most crypto regulation, does not want social media influencers to be able to influence crypto. And then finally, South Africa is putting more retail standards in place. So we have all of these different things going on, but none of them are hand in hand.
Yeah. Hopefully we get some coordination. For everybody that's watching and listening, if you're watching the replay, please bookmark it. 3 little dots at the top right, and you got to go down, I think, to more or something, and then bookmarks are an option. Bookmark it. That really, really helps us with reach. We would super appreciate it. Like, share, subscribe, do all that shit on every platform if you can, please. That way you won't miss any of the critical information that we share every day, Monday to Friday, 12:30 Eastern, on all of these different platforms. And with that, Kiara, have a great weekend and go